Level 1, the altar boy. You are 8 years old and you are standing beside the altar in a robe too large for your shoulders, holding a small brass bell you have practiced ringing at exactly the right moment for weeks. The church is enormous from where you stand, the ceiling somewhere impossibly far above you, the priest's voice echoing off stone that has absorbed centuries of the same words. You don't understand most of what is being said. You understand the silence that follows it, and something in that silence has already started asking you a question you don't have language for yet. Your grandmother tells you that you were a serious child, even as a baby. You don't know if that's true. You know that when the priest walks past you after Mass and rests a hand briefly on your head, something settles in your chest that feels different from anything else that happens to you that week. You start going to Mass even on days you aren't scheduled to serve, sitting quietly in the back pew, watching the same ceremony you've now seen dozens of times, still finding something in it you can't quite name. Your friends are outside playing on Sunday mornings. You don't envy them the way you think you're supposed to. Level 2, the seminarian. You are 18 when you walk through the gates of the seminary with a single suitcase, leaving behind a version of your life that most of your friends assumed you would keep living. University, a career, eventually a family of your own. Some of them don't understand the choice. A few of them are quietly, visibly unsettled by it, as though your decision asks a question of their own lives they'd rather not answer. The years that follow are longer and stranger than you expected. Philosophy, theology, Latin conjugations at 6 in the morning, long stretches of silence that are supposed to teach you something about yourself that noise never could. You have a crisis of faith in your third year, a real one, not the mild doubt people expect seminarians to perform for authenticity. You almost leave. You pack a bag one night and sit with it by the door for an hour before unpacking it again. Unable to explain even to yourself exactly what stopped you, you don't fully explain to anyone, including yourself, exactly what brought you back. The rector never asks. He just quietly assigns you extra work in the garden the next morning as if he already knew. Level 3, the parish priest. You are 26 when you are ordained, standing in front of your family investments that still feel like they belong to someone older and wiser than you currently are. Your first assignment is a small parish in a town you'd never heard of before the bishop's letter arrived. You learn the job is almost nothing like what 4 years of theology prepared you for. You bury people. You marry people. You sit in hospital rooms at 3 in the morning holding the hand of someone who is dying and has no family left to call. You hear confessions that reorganize your understanding of what ordinary people are quietly carrying. Nothing in seminary taught you what to say in that room. You learn slowly that mostly what is needed is presence, not words. You are for the first time completely and permanently responsible for people in a way that has nothing to do with performance and everything to do with simply showing up repeatedly, whether you feel adequate to it or not. Some nights you go home to the small rectory and sit alone in the kitchen, replaying a conversation from that day, wondering if you said the right thing to someone who needed it. Most nights you conclude you probably didn't say it perfectly. You go back the next day anyway. Level 4, the Monsignor. You are 38 when the bishop names you Monsignor, a title that changes very little about your daily work and quite a lot about what's expected of you administratively. You now oversee not just your own parish, but a cluster of others, managing budgets and building repairs and the particular political delicacy of clergy disputes between priests who have known each other for decades. You miss, more than you expected to, the simplicity of the earlier years, the direct, uncomplicated work of sitting with one person in crisis instead of navigating diocesan bureaucracy. You spend an entire month mediating a dispute between two older priests over parish boundaries that started, you eventually discover, over a disagreement from 15 years earlier that neither of them will fully explain. You do the administrative work anyway because you've learned that the institution's ability to keep showing up for people depends on someone being willing to do the unglamorous parts nobody joined for. You still say Mass every single day. That part you protect fiercely, no matter how full the schedule gets. Level 5, the bishop. You are 51 when you are consecrated a bishop, kneeling in a cathedral packed with more people than you have ever addressed at once, a weight physically settling onto your shoulders that has nothing to do with the ceremonial vestments. You now oversee an entire diocese, hundreds of priests, hundreds of thousands of parishioners, decisions that ripple outward in ways you can't always predict or control. You navigate crises you never trained for directly, financial scandals inherited from your predecessor, parishes closing in communities that have had a church for a century, the particular grief of a diocese losing trust after failures that happened before you arrived and that you now have to answer for anyway. You visit a closing parish yourself, an old stone building in a town that has shrunk to a fraction of what it once was, and you stand alone in the empty nave for a long time before locking the door for the last time. You learn that leadership at this level is mostly the willingness to carry weight that isn't entirely yours, because someone has to, and the person who complains least about that fact is usually the one who ends up doing it. Level 6, the cardinal. You are 63 when you receive receive the red hat, kneeling before the Pope himself in a ceremony that connects you, formally, to a small group of men who will eventually choose his successor. You are a prince of the church now, a title that sounds far grander than the reality of endless committee meetings in Rome and the specific exhaustion of Vatican bureaucracy. You serve on congregations that shape doctrine and policy for over 1 billion people worldwide, aware always of the strange gap between the magnitude of the institution you serve and the very ordinary human uncertainty you still feel making difficult decisions. You sit in a meeting that runs 4 hours over a single paragraph of language in a document almost no layperson will ever read closely, and you understand, with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect, why the institution moves as slowly and carefully as it does. You think sometimes about the boy ringing a bell beside an altar, who had no idea a small brass sound could be the first note in a life this large. Level 7. The Pope. You are 74 when the doors of the Sistine Chapel close around 100 and some cardinals, and days later you walk out onto a balcony above a square filled with more people than you will ever be able to fully comprehend, wearing white for the first time, a name that is no longer entirely your own, now attached to yours. You are from this moment responsible for something that stretches back 2,000 years and forward into a future you will not live to see the end of. You spend your mornings in prayer that feels less like performance now than it ever has in your life, because the weight of the decisions waiting for you afterward requires something more honest than habit. You meet with heads of state and refugees in the same week, and you find, somewhat to your own surprise, that the second conversation often teaches you more than the first. You think often about that 8-year-old boy in the oversized robe, holding a bell, understanding nothing except the silence that followed the words. He had no idea, ringing that bell at exactly the right moment, that the small, precise attention he was learning to bring to a single sacred instant would eventually be asked of him on a scale involving the entire world. He just wanted to get the timing right. He had no idea yet that getting small things right, faithfully, for an entire lifetime was the whole of what would eventually be asked of him. It still is. It always was.